Daniel Perry held his daughter's hand as they walked through the enormous plaza in New Chicago. The year was 2247, and this was the most important day in human history. At least that was what the news channels had been saying for weeks. The Confederacy was sending their highest-ranking diplomat to Earth for the first time ever. No alien leader had ever trusted humans enough to visit their planet. Until now. Lucy was 8 years old and she had been talking about nothing else for months. She had pictures of different alien species taped to her bedroom wall. She knew facts about them that Daniel had never heard of. She could tell you how many eyes they had and what they ate for breakfast, and why their wings changed color depending on their mood. Daniel did not understand most of it, but he loved watching her face light up when she talked about the stars. The plaza was packed with thousands of people. Giant screens floated in the air showing different angles of the stage where the ambassador would speak. Security drones buzzed overhead in careful patterns. Daniel had never seen so many people in one place. He squeezed Lucy's hand a little. They found a spot near the eastern viewing section where Lucy could see the stage clearly. She stood on her toes and craned her neck trying to get a better look. Daniel lifted her onto his shoulders, and she laughed with pure joy. He smiled even though his back was already starting to ache. He was 42 years old, and his body reminded him of that fact every single day. 3 years ago, he had lost his wife Maria to an accident at the transit station. A mechanical failure, they called it. Just bad luck. Daniel had spent 6 months barely able to function, but Lucy needed him. She needed a father who could make breakfast and help with homework and tell her stories before bed. So he had pulled himself together piece by piece. He went back to his job at the construction site. He learned to cook meals that were almost as good as Maria's. He became both mother and father because that was what Lucy deserved. Now he worked long hours and came home tired every night. His hands were rough from labor and his knees hurt when it rained. But when Lucy smiled at him, the way she was smiling now, he knew that everything was worth it. The crowd suddenly grew quiet. A shuttle descended from the sky with a soft hum and landed on the stage. The doors opened, and a group of aliens emerged. They were tall and thin with bodies covered in a hard shell that shimmered like oil on water. They had 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the light in strange patterns. Their wings were folded against their backs, and they moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible for creatures their size. Then she appeared. Ambassador Ani was taller than the others, and her shell was a deep purple color that seemed to glow from within. Her wings were larger and more elaborate with patterns that shifted and changed as she walked. She moved to the center of the stage, and the crowd held its breath. Lucy whispered in awe from Daniel's shoulders. She said the ambassador was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Daniel had to admit the alien was impressive. There was something regal about the way she carried herself, something that demanded respect without asking for it. A human woman in a military uniform approached the stage. Her name was Commander, and she was in charge of security for the entire event. Daniel had seen her face on the news many times during the past few weeks. She looked calm and professional, but Daniel noticed the tension in her shoulders. She was worried about something. Ambassador Ani began to speak. Her voice was strange and musical with clicks and whistles mixed into the words. A small device attached to her chest translated everything into English. She talked about peace and cooperation. She talked about how they had watched humanity for many decades and how they had been afraid of what they saw. Humans were violent and unpredictable. They destroyed each other and their own planet with equal enthusiasm. They had kept their distance because they believed humans were too dangerous to approach. But something had changed. The ambassador said she had studied human history more carefully. Yes, there was violence and destruction, but there was also kindness and sacrifice. Humans protected strangers. They built hospitals and schools. They created art and music that served no purpose except to bring joy. The ambassador said she had come to Earth because she wanted to understand this contradiction. She wanted to know if humanity was worth the risk. The crowd listened in silence. Daniel felt something strange in his chest. Pride maybe. Or hope. He had never thought much about what aliens might think of his species. He was just a construction worker trying to raise his daughter. But hearing the ambassador speak made him realize that every human action mattered. Every choice was being watched and judged by civilizations across the galaxy. Then Daniel noticed something wrong. At the edge of the crowd near the security barriers a group of had gathered. They held signs that said things like Earth first and aliens go home. Daniel had heard about these people on the news. They believed that contact with aliens would destroy human culture. They wanted Earth to remain isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Most of them were just shouting and waving their signs, but one man was different. He was not shouting. He was not holding a sign. He was moving through the crowd with a purpose that made Daniel's stomach tighten. The man was pushing against the flow of people. His eyes were fixed on the stage. His hand was reaching into his jacket. Daniel had served in the military when he was younger. That was before Maria and before Lucy, and before his life became about construction sites and bedtime stories. He had seen combat in the border conflicts near the outer colonies. He had seen men with that same look in their eyes, that same cold focus, that same terrible determination. The man was an assassin. Daniel was certain of it. He looked at the security drones overhead. They were focused on the barrier. He looked at Commander on the stage. She was watching the ambassador. The guards were positioned around the stage, but they were looking in the wrong direction. Nobody had noticed the man moving through the crowd. Daniel looked at Lucy on his shoulders. His daughter. His whole world. If he did nothing, the ambassador would die. Relations between humans and them would be destroyed. There might even be war, but if he acted, he would put himself in danger. He might not come back to Lucy. He might leave her alone in the world just like Maria had left them. The man's hand came out of his jacket, holding something that gleamed with deadly light. Daniel made his choice. He lifted Lucy off his shoulders and set her down gently. He knelt in front of her and looked into her eyes. He told her to stay exactly where she was. He told her to count to 20. He told her that Daddy would be right back. Then he turned and pushed into the crowd. Daniel moved through the crowd like a man possessed. He pushed past bodies and ignored the angry shouts that followed him. His eyes never left the assassin. The man was maybe 30 feet ahead and getting closer to the stage with every second. His weapon was a plasma disruptor. Daniel recognized it from his military days. A single shot from that thing could punch through armor plating. The ambassador would not survive. The crowd was packed tight and people did not want to move. Daniel shouldered his way forward using every bit of strength his tired body could produce. His construction work had kept him strong even as he aged. His arms were thick from lifting heavy materials. His legs were solid from climbing scaffolds. But he was not the young soldier he used to be. His lungs burned and his heart pounded against his ribs. The assassin raised the weapon. Time seemed to slow down. Daniel could see the man's finger tightening on the trigger. He could see the ambassador standing on the stage, completely unaware of the danger. He could see Commander turning her head as if sensing something wrong, but knowing she would never react in time. Daniel launched himself forward with a desperate cry. He crashed into the assassin from behind just as the weapon fired. The shot went wide and struck a decorative fountain near the stage. Water and stone exploded into the air. People screamed and began to run in every direction. Daniel and the assassin hit the ground hard. Daniel landed on top, but the other man was younger and faster. He twisted beneath Daniel and drove an elbow into his ribs. Pain exploded through Daniel's chest, but he held on. He grabbed the man's wrist and slammed it against the ground, trying to knock the weapon loose. The assassin snarled something ugly and drove his knee into Daniel's stomach. Daniel gasped, and his grip loosened for just a moment. That was all the opening the assassin needed. He rolled free and scrambled to his feet with the weapon still in his hand. Daniel forced himself up despite the agony in his body. Blood was running down his forehead from a cut he did not remember getting. His vision blurred, but he could still see the assassin raising the weapon again, this time aimed at Daniel. There was no time to think. Daniel threw himself forward and grabbed the man's legs. They both went down again in a tangle of limbs. The weapon skittered across the ground, and Daniel kicked it away with his foot. The assassin screamed in rage and wrapped his hands around Daniel's throat. Daniel could not breathe. The man's fingers were like iron bands crushing his windpipe. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He clawed at the assassin's hands but could not break the grip. His strength was fading. His body was giving up. Then he thought of Lucy, his little girl standing in the crowd counting to 20, waiting for her daddy to come back. She had already lost her mother. She could not lose her father too. Something primal rose up inside Daniel, a fury born of love and desperation. He stopped pulling at the man's hands and instead drove his thumbs into the assassin's eyes. The man howled and released his grip. Daniel sucked in a painful breath and rolled away. The guards finally arrived. 4 of them surrounded the assassin and pinned him to the ground with their multiple arms. More guards formed a protective circle around the ambassador, who was being rushed toward the shuttle. Commander was shouting orders into her communicator. Security drones swarmed overhead, filling the air with their high-pitched whine. Daniel lay on his back staring up at the sky. Every part of his body hurt. His throat felt like it had been crushed. His ribs screamed with every breath. But he was alive. The ambassador was alive. He had done it. He pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. The world spun around him and he almost fell back down. A hand appeared in front of his face. He looked up and saw Ambassador Ani standing there. Her guards had tried to move her to safety, but she had refused to leave. She was looking down at Daniel with her compound eyes, and her expression was something he could not read. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Human and alien, construction worker and diplomat. 2 beings from completely different worlds connected by a single act of violence and courage. The ambassador said something in her own language. The translator device on her chest was damaged from the chaos and only fragments came through. Daniel heard the words thank and brave and why, but he did not wait for the full message. He did not want thanks. He did not want recognition. He just wanted to get back to his daughter. Daniel turned away from the ambassador and pushed into the panicking crowd. People were running in every direction. Some were screaming. Others were crying. Security forces were trying to restore order, but there were too many people and too much fear. It was chaos. Daniel moved against the flow of bodies. His legs felt like they were made of lead. Every step was an effort, but he kept going because Lucy was waiting for him. He had told her to count to 20. How long had it been? A minute? 2 minutes? 10? He had no idea. He found her exactly where he had left her. She was standing perfectly still with tears streaming down her face. When she saw him, she ran forward and threw her arms around his waist. She was shaking and sobbing and saying his name over and over. Daniel dropped to his knees and held his daughter tight. He smoothed her hair and told her everything was okay. He told her daddy was right here. He told her he would never leave her. The words came out rough and broken because his throat was damaged, but Lucy did not seem to notice. Behind them, the chaos continued. Security forces were evacuating the plaza. Medical drones were attending to people who had been injured in the stampede. News cameras were filming everything from above. Somewhere in the distance, the assassin was being loaded into a transport under heavy guard. None of it mattered to Daniel. All that mattered was the small, warm body pressed against his chest. All that mattered was his daughter. He picked Lucy up and carried her away from the plaza. She buried her face in his shoulder and wrapped her arms around his neck. People rushed past them without a second glance. Everyone was too focused on their own fear to notice one tired man carrying a little girl. They walked for a long time. Daniel's body screamed for rest, but he kept moving. He wanted to put as much distance as possible between Lucy and what had happened. Finally, they reached the transit station and boarded a train heading home. The train was almost empty. Everyone else was either still at the plaza or watching the news from their homes. Daniel sat down with Lucy on his lap and closed his eyes. His hands were shaking. His heart was still racing. But they were safe. That was all that mattered. Lucy asked him what happened. Daniel told her there was a bad man who wanted to hurt the ambassador. He told her the bad man was caught and nobody was seriously hurt. He did not tell her that he was the one who stopped it. He did not tell her that he had almost died. Some things a child did not need to know. The train carried them through the city toward home. Outside the windows, the world continued as if nothing had changed. But Daniel knew that was not true. Something had changed. He just did not know what yet. 3 days had passed since the attack, and Ambassador Ani could not stop thinking about the human who had saved her life. She stood at the observation window of her diplomatic vessel watching Earth rotate slowly below. The planet was beautiful in a wild and dangerous way. Blue oceans and green continents and swirling white clouds. A world full of life and chaos and contradiction. Just like its people. Entered the observation room and bowed his head respectfully. He was young for a diplomat. His shell was still a pale green color that would darken with age. His wings were small and underdeveloped, but he was clever and loyal, and Ani trusted him completely. She asked him if there was any news about the human, shook his head, and said the search was proving difficult. The security cameras had malfunctioned during the attack, some kind of electronic interference. The man's face was never clearly captured. Witnesses described him as average height with brown hair, maybe in his 40s. That description matched millions of human males on this continent alone. Ani turned back to the window. In culture, a life debt was sacred. When someone saved your life, you were bound to them forever. You owed them honor and gratitude and service. To ignore such a debt was the greatest shame imaginable. It would bring disgrace upon her entire lineage stretching back 1,000 generations. She had to find this human. She had to repay what she owed. Commander had offered to help with the search. The human military woman seemed genuinely dedicated to solving this mystery. She had teams reviewing every scrap of footage from the event. She had investigators interviewing witnesses. She had analysts studying crowd movement patterns, but so far they had found nothing useful. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, Daniel Perry was living his normal life. He woke up at 6 in the morning and made breakfast for Lucy. Scrambled eggs and toast with a glass of orange juice. She ate quickly because she was excited about a science project at school, something about building a model of the solar system. Daniel walked her to the transit station and watched her board the train to school. Then he headed to the construction site where he worked. His body still ached from the fight 3 days ago. His ribs were bruised and his throat was tender, but he could not afford to take time off. The rent was due next week and Lucy needed new shoes. His Barnes met him at the site entrance, was a big man with a loud voice and a friendly smile. He slapped Daniel on the back and asked if he had seen the news. Daniel said he had been avoiding the news lately, laughed and said he was missing all the excitement. The whole world was talking about the mystery hero who had saved Ambassador Ani. Nobody knew who he was. The security footage showed only a blur of motion. Some people thought he was a trained soldier. Others thought he was an undercover agent. There were conspiracy theories spreading across the networks claiming he was everything from a time traveler to an alien in disguise. Daniel said nothing. He picked up his tools and got to work. That evening he picked Lucy up from school and they walked home together. She chattered happily about her day. Her science project was coming along well. Her friend had invited her to a birthday party next weekend. Her teacher had shown them a video about and Lucy had known more facts than anyone else in the class. They stopped at a small grocery store to buy ingredients for dinner. While Daniel was choosing vegetables, Lucy wandered over to the magazine rack. She came back holding a news tablet with the headline "Mystery Hero Saves Alien Ambassador." The screen showed a blurry image of a man tackling someone to the ground. Lucy looked up at her father with wide, serious eyes. She asked him if he was the hero everyone was talking about. Daniel knelt down so he was at her eye level. He told her that heroes were people who did what needed to be done without expecting anything in return. He told her that real heroes did not want fame or rewards. They just wanted to help and then go back to their normal lives. Lucy thought about this for a moment. Then she asked if that meant he was the hero or not. Daniel smiled and took the tablet from her hand. He put it back on the rack and told her it was time to go home. Up in orbit, Ani addressed the Galactic Council via a secure transmission. The council chamber was filled with holographic representatives from dozens of species. Some looked vaguely humanoid. Others were so alien that their forms were difficult to comprehend. They had gathered to hear the ambassadors report on the situation with Earth. Ani told them about the attack. She described how close she had come to death, and she told them about the unknown human who had risked everything to save her life. A stranger with no obligation to help, a member of a species that they had long considered dangerous and unpredictable. The council members murmured among themselves. One of them asked why a human would do such a thing. What could he possibly gain from protecting an alien diplomat? Ani said that was exactly the point. The human had gained nothing. He had not waited for thanks or recognition. He had simply acted and then disappeared into the crowd. This was not the behavior of a violent and selfish species. This was something else entirely. She told the council that humanity had surprised her. Yes, they were capable of great destruction, but they were also capable of extraordinary compassion. A species that produced individuals willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers deserved a second look. Perhaps they and the other civilizations of the galaxy had misjudged Earth. The transmission ended, and Ani returned to her quarters, was waiting with an update. The investigators had made progress. Analysis of crowd movement patterns suggested the mystery man had come from the eastern viewing section. Security footage from a nearby transit station showed someone matching his description leaving the area with a young girl approximately 30 minutes after the attack. They were getting closer. Back on Earth, Daniel put Lucy to bed and read her a story about a princess who befriended a dragon. Lucy fell asleep before he finished the last page. He sat beside her bed for a long time watching her breathe. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. She had no idea that her father was the most wanted man on two worlds. Daniel walked to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, an alien diplomat was searching for him. Somewhere up there, civilizations were debating the future of humanity based on his actions. He had not asked for any of this. He had just done what needed to be done. He closed the curtains and went to bed. 2 weeks had passed since the attack, and the search was closing in. Sat in a small office at Earth Security Headquarters, reviewing data on a holographic display. Commander stood beside him, pointing out details on the screen. They had been working together for days and had developed a grudging respect for each other. The breakthrough came from the transit records. A ticket had been purchased at 3:47 p.m. on the day of the attack from a station near the eastern viewing section. The destination was a residential district on the outskirts of New Chicago. The payment was made with a personal credit account registered to a man named Daniel Perry. Commander pulled up his file. Daniel Perry, age 42, occupation construction worker, widowed 3 years ago, one daughter named Lucy, age 8, military service record from 15 years ago including 2 tours in the outer colony conflicts, honorable discharge with commendations for bravery. Studied the image on the screen. It showed a tired-looking man with brown hair and kind eyes. He did not look like a hero. He looked like an ordinary human worn down by work and worry, but had learned that humans often surprised you. They decided to visit Daniel's neighborhood and talk to people who knew him. Perhaps someone could confirm he was the man they were looking for. Commander arranged for a small security team to accompany them, insisted on going himself. He wanted to understand this human before bringing him to the ambassador. The neighborhood was modest and working class. Small apartment buildings lined the streets. Children played in a park while their parents watched from benches. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and strangers were noticed immediately. Their first interview was with an elderly woman named Grace Porter who lived in the apartment next to Daniel's. She was tiny and wrinkled with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She invited them inside and offered tea, which Commander politely declined. Grace spoke warmly about Daniel. She said he was the best neighbor she had ever had. Quiet and polite, never caused any trouble, always willing to help when someone needed it. Last winter her roof had leaked during a storm and Daniel had spent his entire weekend fixing it. He would not accept any payment. He said neighbors helped neighbors and that was all there was to it. Asked if Daniel ever talked about himself. Grace shook her head. She said Daniel kept his past private. She knew he had lost his wife a few years back and that he adored his little girl, but beyond that he never shared much. He was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Commander asked if Daniel had seemed different in the past 2 weeks. Grace thought about it and said he had seemed tired, more tired than usual, and he had been keeping Lucy close. They went everywhere together these days. She had assumed he was just being a protective father after the scary news about the assassination attempt. They thanked Grace and moved on to interview other neighbors. The stories were all similar. Daniel Perry was described as humble. He helped people without being asked. He never complained about his own problems. He was devoted to his daughter in a way that made other parents feel inadequate. One neighbor mentioned seeing Daniel come home on the day of the attack. He had been carrying Lucy and walking slowly like a man in pain. There was blood on his forehead. When the neighbor asked if he was okay, Daniel had said he just tripped in the crowd. Nothing to worry about. Felt something shift inside him. He had studied humans for years from a distance. He had read their history and analyzed their behavior. He had concluded, like most, that they were a species defined by violence and selfishness. But this investigation was changing his mind. Daniel Perry was not exceptional among his kind. He was not a trained hero or a secret agent. He was just a man, a father, a neighbor, a construction worker with rough hands and tired eyes. And yet he had risked his life to save a stranger from another world. He had asked for nothing in return. He had simply done what he believed was right. Perhaps this was what humanity truly was. Not the wars and the destruction, not the greed and the cruelty, but these small, quiet acts of courage performed by ordinary people who never expected to be noticed. They visited Daniel's workplace next. The construction site was loud and busy, with machines lifting heavy materials and workers shouting instructions to each other. The supervisor was a woman named Carol with short gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She led them to a quiet corner where they could talk. Carol said Daniel was one of her best workers, reliable and skilled, never late, never complained. The other workers respected him because he worked as hard as anyone despite being older than most of them. She said losing him would be a real blow to the team. Commander asked where Daniel was today. Carol said he had requested a few days off to take his daughter camping, some remote forest up north. No communication networks out there. He said they both needed to get away from the city for a while. Understood immediately. Daniel knew they were looking for him. He had seen the news reports about the search for the mystery hero. He had taken his daughter and disappeared into the wilderness to avoid being found. Not because he was afraid, but because he did not want the attention. They returned to the security headquarters and composed a message for Ambassador Ani. He told her they had identified the man, Daniel Perry, a widowed father, a construction worker, a former soldier, an ordinary human who had done an extraordinary thing and wanted nothing but to be left alone. Ani received the message in her quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel. She read it 3 times. Each time she felt her determination grow stronger. This man had saved her life. He had changed the course of history. He deserved to be honored whether he wanted it or not. She sent orders to find him, track him down, do whatever it takes. She would meet this Daniel Perry face to face. Meanwhile, in a remote forest far from the city, Daniel sat beside a campfire with Lucy. The flames crackled and popped, sending sparks drifting up into the night sky. Above them, a million stars shone with cold, distant light. Somewhere among those stars, alien civilizations were making decisions that would shape the future of humanity. Lucy asked her father why they had left so suddenly. She said she missed her friends and her school and her room. Daniel looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. He told her that sometimes people needed to remember what was important. Sometimes the noise of the world got too loud and you had to find somewhere quiet. Sometimes a father just needed to spend time with his daughter. Lucy thought about this and then leaned against his shoulder. She said she was glad they came, even if she missed her friends. The stars were really pretty out here. Daniel put his arm around her and held her close. For now this was enough. For now they were safe and together, and that was all that mattered. The rest of the world could wait. Daniel and Lucy returned home after 5 days in the forest. They were tired and dirty and happy in a way that only comes from spending time in nature. Lucy had learned to identify 3 different types of birds and had collected a pocket full of interesting rocks. Daniel had managed to forget about the outside world for a few precious days. The forgetting ended when they reached their apartment building. Commander was waiting on the front steps. She was alone and out of uniform, wearing simple civilian clothes. She stood up when she saw them approaching and raised her hand in a gesture that was more greeting than surrender. Daniel told Lucy to go inside and start unpacking. He said he would be up in a minute. Lucy looked at the strange woman and then at her father. She could sense something was wrong, but she trusted him. She nodded and went inside without argument. Commander apologized for showing up unannounced. She said she had tried to give him space, but the situation had become complicated. His identity had been confirmed. Ambassador Ani knew who he was, and she wanted to meet him. Daniel said no. He said he had done what needed to be done, and that should be the end of it. He did not want recognition or rewards. He did not want his face on the news. He just wanted to live his life and raise his daughter in peace. Commander nodded slowly. She said she understood and she respected his decision, but she warned him that they were not going to give up easily. In their culture, a life debt was sacred. The ambassador would keep searching for a way to honor him. She would not rest until the debt was repaid. Daniel asked what he was supposed to do about that. Commander said she did not know. She was just delivering the message. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him alone on the steps. The next few days were difficult. Someone had leaked his identity to the media. Reporters began gathering outside his building. News drones hovered near his windows trying to get footage. His face was everywhere. Daniel Perry, the mystery hero, the man who saved the alien ambassador. His neighbors were kind about it. Grace Porter chased away reporters with a broom. Barnes from the construction site gave interviews saying Daniel was the best man he knew. Even Lucy's teacher sent a message saying how proud the school was. But Daniel hated all of it. He had never wanted to be famous. He had just wanted to help and then go back to his quiet life. Now that life was gone. Strangers recognized him on the street. People asked for pictures. Children pointed and whispered. Lucy handled it better than he expected. Other kids at school called her father a hero and asked her questions about what happened. Lucy told them her father was just her dad and he made really good pancakes. She did not understand what all the fuss was about. One evening, there was a knock on the apartment door. Daniel assumed it was another reporter and prepared to tell them to leave. But when he opened the door, he found himself face to face with Ambassador Ani. She was even more impressive up close. Her purple shell gleamed under the hallway lights. Her compound eyes reflected his face 1,000 times. Her wings rustled softly behind her. She had to duck to fit through the doorway, but she managed it with surprising grace. Beside her stood the young aide who had helped track Daniel down. Behind them, the hallway was empty. No guards, no cameras, no reporters. Somehow they had slipped past everyone. Daniel stared at them for a long moment. Then he sighed and stepped aside. He said they might as well come in. He asked if they wanted coffee. The ambassador politely declined, did not drink human beverages, but she accepted his invitation to sit. She folded herself onto his small couch with her wings tucked carefully behind her, remained standing near the door. Lucy appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her eyes went wide when she saw the aliens in their living room. She had seen on screens and in books, but never in real life. Never this close. She walked slowly into the room as if approaching a wild animal. The ambassador turned to look at her. For a moment they simply studied each other. Human child and alien diplomat. Then Ani spoke in her musical voice, and the translator device converted her words. She said Lucy must be very proud of her father. Lucy looked at Daniel and then back at the ambassador. She said her father was the best dad in the whole galaxy. He made breakfast every morning and helped with homework every night. He told good stories and gave the best hugs. She did not know anything about saving ambassadors, but she knew her dad was special. Something changed in Ani's expression, a softening that Daniel had not expected. She turned back to him and said she understood now. She had been trying to figure out why he ran away, why he refused recognition, why he wanted nothing in return for his courage. Now she knew. He had someone more important to get back to. Daniel nodded slowly. He said his wife died 3 years ago. Since then, Lucy was everything to him. The only thing that mattered. He had not thought about being a hero when he saw the assassin. He had not thought about politics or history or galactic relations. He had just known that someone was in danger and he could help. That was all there was to it. The ambassador rose from the couch and approached Lucy. She knelt down, bringing her massive form to the child's eye level. Her wings spread slightly for balance. Up close she smelled like cinnamon and something else. Something alien and ancient. She told Lucy that her father had changed the course of history. Because of what he did, the Confederacy would officially propose a full alliance with Earth. Humanity would be welcomed into the galactic community as partners and equals. Trade and technology and knowledge would flow between their worlds, all because one tired father had done what needed to be done. Lucy looked up at her dad with wonder in her eyes. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had not realized. He had not understood the full impact of his actions. He was just a construction worker, just a father, just a man trying to do right. Ambassador Ani stood and faced Daniel one last time. She said her people had watched humanity for decades. They had seen violence and destruction. They had seen greed and cruelty. They had feared what humans might do if given access to the stars. But they had missed something. They had missed the quiet courage, the everyday kindness, the willingness to sacrifice for strangers. Daniel had shown her what humanity truly was, not the wars or the weapons, but this. A father who loved his daughter, a neighbor who fixed roofs without asking for payment, a stranger who risked everything for someone he had never met. Perhaps that contradiction was what made humans worth knowing. She left without ceremony, followed her out. The door closed and the apartment was quiet again. Lucy immediately started asking 1,000 questions. Daniel answered as best he could while making dinner. Just another evening, just another night. Later that week, a news broadcast announced the historic Earth Alliance. The anchor mentioned the hero whose actions had made it possible. They showed a single grainy image of Daniel walking away through the panicked crowd with Lucy in his arms. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had dismissed humanity as primitive and violent watched that footage. They saw a tired man carrying a child. They saw someone walking away from glory and recognition. They saw a father going home. And they wondered what else they had gotten wrong about Earth.